Christmas or New Year's all the time, sighed Meg the morning after the party. Oh, wouldn't it be fun? Answered Joe, yawning dismally. It does seem so nice to go to parties and drive home and read and rest and not work. I always envy girls who do such things. I'm so fond of luxury, said Meg, trying to decide which of two shabby gowns was the least shabby. Well, we can't have it, so don't let us grumble, but let's shoulder our bundles and trudge along cheerfully as Marmee does. But Meg didn't brighten, for her burden, consisting of four spoiled king children, seemed heavier than ever. I shall have to toil and moil all my days, with only little bits of fun now and then I'll get old and ugly and sour because I'm poor and I can't enjoy my life as other girls do. It's really a shame. What does she mean by I have to toil and moil? Jacob? Hmm. I'm just gonna have to work every day for the rest of my life. Meg went down wearing an injured look and wasn't at all agreeable at breakfast time. Actually, everyone seemed rather out of sorts. Beth had a headache and was laying on the sofa, comforting herself with her cats. Amy was fretting because her lessons were not learned. Mrs. March was very busy trying to finish a letter, which must go at once, and Hannah had the grumps, for being up late did not suit her. What's the general mood this morning after the party? Jacob? Yeah, everyone's kind of in a bad mood. Things are not going well this morning. There never was such a cross family, cried Jo, losing her temper when she had upset an inkstand, broken both of her boot lacings, and sat down upon her hat. Well, you're the crossest person in it, returned Amy. Girls, do just be quiet for 1 minute. I must get this off by the early mail, and you drive me distracted with your worry, cried Mrs. March, crossing out the third spoiled sentence in her letter. There was a momentary lull, broken by Hannah, who stalked in, laid two hot turnovers on the table, and then stalked out again. The girls called these turnovers muffs, for they had no others, and found the hot pies very comforting to their hands on cold mornings. Kind of think of it like, okay, what's a muff, Brooklyn? Hmm. So a muff is like, have you ever seen those people in movies that wear those fancy like fur things and they stick their hands in them? Okay, that's a muff. It's like a big fur jacket for your hands. You stick them in like this, just like it just sits right here. Stick your hands in. Okay, so they called them muffs because these weren't actually like muffs. They were like hot cakes or like hot pancakes or biscuits. And they would carry them in their hands in the mornings to eat for breakfast, obviously, but it also made their hands warm. So they called them muffs. Yes. Yeah, kind of. Hmm. Hannah never forgot to make them, no matter how busy or grumpy she might be, for the walk was long and bleak. The poor things got no other lunch, and they were seldom home before 2 o'clock. Cuddle your cats and get over your headache, Bethy. Goodbye, Marmee. We sure are rascals this morning, but we'll come home regular angels. Now then, Meg? And Jo tramped away, feeling that the pilgrims were not setting out as they ought to do. They always looked back at the house before turning the corner, for their mother was always at the window to nod and smile and to wave to them. Whatever their mood might be, that last glimpse of that motherly face was sure to affect them like sunshine. Where are Jo and Meg going? Micah? To their jobs. Meg is going to take care of the king children, and Jo is going to take care of the old fussy old lady. If Marmee shook her fist at us instead of kissing her hand to us, it would serve us right, cried Jo, taking a remorseful satisfaction in the snowy walk and bitter wind. Don't use such dreadful expressions, Meg chided. Call yourself any names you like, but I am neither a rascal nor a wretch, and I don't choose to be called so. Why does Jo say, You know, if Mom had shook her fist at us, we'd be deserving of it. Brian?
Because they've been kind of like crazy.
Yeah, they've been kind of little nasties that morning. They had every right to be not, goodbye, children, but get out! Okay? Much different. And so Joe says, you're just cross today. What's another word we could use for cross? You've seen that word a couple times so far in this chapter. Connor?
They're just mad today because
Mm-hmm. You're just cross today because you can't sit in the lap of luxury all the time. You poor dear. Just wait until I make my fortune, and then you shall have carriages and ice cream and high-heeled slippers and posies and parties. Ooh, sorry. How ridiculous you are, Joe. But Meg laughed and felt better in spite of herself. Lucky for you I am. Thank goodness I can always find something funny to keep me up. Come on, don't croak any more, but come home jolly. There's a dear. Joe gave her sister an encouraging pat on the shoulder as they parted ways for the day. Each went a different way, trying to be cheerful in spite of the wintry weather, hard work, and the unsatisfied desires of youth. Basically, they're trying to have a good attitude about having to go to work, but they really don't want to. When Mr. March, the father, had lost his property in trying to help an unfortunate friend, the two oldest girls begged to be allowed to do something toward their own support at least. Okay? So what that means is this. This is talking about kind of the history of what happened to the family back when they were rich and then how they became poor. Okay? So it says that Mr. March, their father, he lost his richness, basically his property that he owned, because he chose to help out a friend who was in need. Okay? So because he chose to help someone else, he lost a lot of his money. Okay? It doesn't say if he gave them the money or if he invested in them and then it went bankrupt, whatever it was, he was trying to help a friend and it ended up hurting him. Okay? When that happened, both Joe and Meg said, hey, we want to go to work. We want to be able to earn money for ourselves. You don't have to take care of us. We'll pay our own way. Okay? They begged, please let us get a job. We'll help with the family expenses. We'll bring home some of the money. Just let us get a job. Margaret found a place as nursery governess and felt rich with her small salary. As she said, she was fond of luxury, and her chief trouble, or the chief burden she bore, was poverty. She found it harder to bear than the others because she could remember the time when want of any kind was unknown. Why does Meg struggle more than the other sisters at being poor? Chloe?
She's the oldest, so she was the most used to being rich and stuff.
Very good. She's the one who most remembers what it was like when they had money. Now that they don't have money, she's the one that feels it the hardest. It's kind of like if you grew up never having chocolate and someone came to you and said, dude, have you ever had chocolate? I really want some. If you've never tasted chocolate, you're like, I mean, okay, that's fine. But once you've tasted chocolate and you see how good it is, it makes it a lot harder to give it up. You see what I'm saying? Okay? Well, depending on your taste, but you get the point. She tried not to be envious of the kings. What does envious mean? Sadiksha? Jealous. Because she works for a rich family. She tried not to be envious of them, for there she daily saw all she wanted. Poor Meg seldom complained, but a sense of injustice made her feel bitter toward everyone sometimes. She had not yet learned to know how rich she was and the blessings that alone can make life happy. What does this last sentence mean? Someone put it in your own words. She, as in Meg, had not yet learned to know just how rich she was and the blessings that alone can make life happy. Layla? Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want all of my siblings. I have a tiny family, and that's really what I want.
Very good. Excellent. Joe happened to suit Aunt March, who was lame. Not lame as in boring, but lame as in she couldn't get up and walk, like she was disabled. Who was lame and needed an active person to wait upon her. The childless old lady had offered to adopt one of the girls when the financial troubles came, but the unworldly Marches only said, "We cannot give up our girls. Rich or poor, we will keep together and be happy in one another." Okay, Aunt March is, I believe it's Mr. March's sister. Okay, and she is incredibly wealthy. Okay, now when Mr. March's family, when her brother's family went broke, not broke, but when they became more poor than they were before, okay, she said, "Hey, it's expensive to feed four girls. I don't have any children. I will adopt one of your daughters as my own, and I'll take care of her." Well, seems like a reasonable offer, okay? But the Marches said, "No, no, 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 no. Even if we have to kind of pay more money to keep all of our girls, we want to keep all of our girls. It's more important to us to have our family together than it is for all of them for them to have nicer, finer, expensive things." The old lady was much offended by this and wouldn't speak to them for a time. But just happening to meet Joe at a friend's, the girl's comical face and blunt manners struck the old lady's fancy, and she proposed to take her for a companion. This did not suit Joe at all, but she accepted the place since nothing better appeared. To everyone's surprise, she got on remarkably well with her irascible relative. What does irascible mean? Brian?
Crabby, difficult to get along with.
So it's kind of funny. Joe, who has a temper anyways, is taking care of Aunt March, who's a little bit crabby herself, but they actually get along pretty well. It's kind of funny. There was an occasional tempest or a fight between the two, and once Joe even marched all the way home, declaring that she couldn't bear it any longer. But Aunt March always cleared things up quickly and sent for Joe to come back again, with such urgency that she could not refuse. For in her heart, she rather liked the peppery old lady. This is an interesting sentence. What does it mean by peppery? How can you describe a person as peppery? Sophie? Okay, you're kind of on the right track. Brooklyn? Pepper is hot and spicy, right? Aunt March kind of has a hot and spicy attitude. She's a little bit. She can be set off pretty quickly, which you'll see here in just a little bit. I suspect that the real attraction for Joe was a large library full of fine books, which was left to dust and spiders since Uncle March died. Okay, so that's Aunt March's husband. This dim, dusty room contained a wilderness of books in which she could wander wherever she liked. The moment Aunt March took her nap, or was busy with company, Joe hurried off to this quiet place, and curling herself up in the easy chair, devoured poetry, romance, history, and travels like a regular bookworm. But, like all happiness, it didn't last long. As sure as she had just reached the heart of the story, a shrill voice called, "Josephine! Josephine!" And she had to leave her paradise to go wind yarn or wash the poodle or read Belcham's essays by the hour. But Joe found her greatest affliction in the fact that she couldn't read, run, and ride as much as she liked to. A quick temper, sharp tongue, and restless spirit were always getting her into scrapes. But the training she received at Aunt March's was just what she needed, and the thought that she was doing something to support herself made her happy, in spite of the perpetual "Josephine!" What is Joe's burden? What is her greatest affliction or trial or difficult thing she has to deal with? Jacob? That is part of it, but what does she really want to do all the time? Read, run around, ride horses, play, be active, which are all things that the boys are supposed to do. Back then, the girls are supposed to be quiet, calm. They cook, they bake, they sew, all this stuff. Joe's not into any of that. Okay? That's her biggest burden, her biggest affliction, her biggest trial. Now, Beth. Beth was too bashful or too shy to go to school, so she did her lessons at home with her father. Even when he went away, her mother was called to devote her skill and energy to soldiers' aid societies. Beth went faithfully on by herself and did the very best she could. She was a housewifely little creature and helped Hannah keep the home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. Long, quiet days she spent. Shh, stop. Long, quiet days she spent, not lonely nor idle, for her little world was filled with imaginary friends. There were 6 dolls to be awoken and dressed every morning, for Beth was a child still, and loved her dolls as well as ever. All were outcasts her older sisters had outgrown, and Amy would have nothing to do with them, for they were old or ugly. But Beth cherished all these dolls all the more tenderly for that very reason, and set up a hospital for infirm dolls or sick dolls. All of them were fed and clothed, nursed and caressed with an affection that never failed. Okay? So this is kind of Beth's personality. She's too shy to go to school, so she stays at home. Either her parents homeschool her or she teaches herself. Okay? And then what she spends her whole day doing is taking care of everyone. Okay? She helps Hannah with the housework. She helps her mom cooking dinner, helps cleaning up the house, helps doing the chores. She even takes care of these dolls. Okay? She feeds them, she clothes them, she nurses them. Okay, that's just who Beth is. She takes care of everyone. Never thinks about herself, but is always helping everyone else. But Beth had her troubles as well as the others. She often wept a little weep, as Joe said, because she couldn't take music lessons and have a fine piano. She loved music so dearly and practiced away so patiently at the jingling old instrument. Nobody saw Beth wipe the tears off the yellow keys that wouldn't keep in tune when she was all alone. She sang like a little lark about her work, and day after day said hopefully to herself, I know I'll get my music sometime if I'm good. So what is Beth's burden? What's her biggest trouble? Aiden?
So her biggest trouble is
Very good. She doesn't have the nice piano that she wants. And occasionally, she'd be playing the piano and it wouldn't sound right because the piano was out of tune. And she would just kind of cry a little bit to herself. She was so frustrated, and the tears would just fall down her face, and no one saw. She was just so quiet. There are many Beths in the world, shy and quiet, just sitting in corners until needed, and living for others so cheerfully that no one sees the sacrifices, till this sweet, sunshiny presence vanishes, leaving silence and shadow behind. You ever known someone that people don't really notice them, but they're so important that that when they're gone, it like falls apart? You know what I'm talking about? I played on some teams that were like that. It was like, oh, that person's not here. They're always here. We can't play without them. And the whole thing like fell apart. They were like the quiet strength, basically. Huh?
yeah, if you weren't here.
You'd
Yeah, that'd be ball. We'd all be we'd all
If there were no teachers,
if there were no
Chaos. If anybody had asked Amy what the greatest trial of her life was, she would have answered at once, my nose. When she was a baby, Joe had accidentally dropped her into the coal bin, and Amy insisted that this fall had ruined her nose forever. It was not big nor red, it was only rather flat. and all the pinching in the world could not give it an aristocratic point. Now, you have to understand, aristocratic means like upper class, okay? And have you ever heard someone say they walk around with their nose in the air? Okay, it means they walk around like they're too good for everyone else. They don't even dare look down. Okay, an aristocratic point was kind of what Amy thought of as someone who's very like rich and important. Okay, and she thought her nose was too flat. She wanted it to be pointy. Okay, so she would walk around all day and she would pinch, and try to get her nose to point up. And just would never do it. No one really minded it but herself, and it was doing its best to grow, but Amy felt deeply the want of an aristocratic nose. Little Raphael, as her sisters called her, had a talent for drawing and was never so happy as when she was copying flowers, designing fairies, or illustrating stories. Her teachers complained that instead of doing her sums, she covered her slate with animals. She was a great favorite with her schoolmates, though. Her little airs and graces and accomplishments were much admired. Besides her drawing, she could play 12 tunes, crochet, and read French without mispronouncing more than two-thirds of the words. Her long words were considered perfectly elegant by the other girls. But Amy was well on her way to becoming spoiled, for everyone petted her. What does it mean by petted? Jacob? Yes. Basically, gave her everything she wanted. Okay? It's like the baby of the family, right? They get whatever they want. They're always perfect.
I know. Especially like my little brother.
Well, there was one thing, however, that rather quenched her vanity. She had to wear her cousin's clothes.
Oh no.
And her cousin Florence's mama had not a particle of taste. Everything was good, well made, and little worn, but Amy's artistic eyes were much afflicted, especially this winter when her school dress was a dull purple with yellow dots and no trimming. Poor Amy, she had to wear ugly clothes. She hated it. Meg was Amy's confidant. What's a confidant? Ian, then I'll answer your question. Meg was Amy's confidant. Oh, here. What's a confidant?
Confidant. Now, a trusted friend with me, one shares food.
Mm-hmm.
And then, people say, the youngest people in this family always get it off easy. We don't.
Yes, they do.
I think it depends on who you ask.
It is
My
not
sister
our
gets
job.
every
You get beat up and beat up and beat up always. And you get same when you're the middle child.
Whoa. Meg was Amy's confidant. So basically, whenever anything was wrong, Amy went and talked to Meg. Like, I can't believe I have to wear an ugly dress. And Meg was like, okay, blah, blah, blah. And by some strange attraction of opposites, Joe was Gentle Beth's confidant.
It makes sense.
The two older girls meant a great deal to one another, so Meg and Joe, but each took one of the younger sisters into her keeping and watched over her in her own way. Has anybody got anything to tell? Said Meg as they sat sewing together that evening. It's been such a dismal day. I'm really dying for some kind of amusement. Oh, I had a queer time with Aunt today, and as I got the best of it, I'll tell you about it, began Joe, who dearly loved to tell stories. I was reading aloud those dreadful essays by Belsham, and reciting away as I always do. Aunt usually kind of drops off, meaning she falls asleep, and then I take out some nice book and read like mad until she wakes up. So basically, she's reading the boring book, right? She's like, chapter 3, blah 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 blah. She reads, And when she sees Aunt March fall asleep, then she grabs the fun book and reads until her aunt wakes back up. And she blah 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 blah. Okay, kind of what she does. Aunt usually drops off, and then I take out some nice book and read like mad until she wakes up. So the minute her cap began to bob like a top-heavy dahlia flower, I whipped the Vicar of Wakefield out of my pocket and read away with one eye on him and one eye on Aunt. I had just got to where they all tumbled into the water when I forgot and laughed out loud. Aunt March woke up and, being a little more good-natured after her nap, told me to read it a bit and show what frivolous work I preferred to the worthy and instructive Belsham. I did my very best, and she even liked it. Okay, so what happened was she was reading the boring book while Aunt was asleep. She was reading the fun book, and then she got to a part that she liked, and she laughed out loud and forgot that Aunt March was sleeping. Okay, Aunt March woke up and said, "What are you reading?" "Well, I'm sorry, okay?" She's like, No. Go ahead and read it. I'll show you how dumb it is, how frivolous it is." And she begins to read the fun book out loud, and Aunt March actually liked it a little bit. "Well, did she own that she liked it?" said Meg. "Like, did she say she liked it? Did she admit it?" "Oh, bless you, no." "Oh, but she did let old Belsham rest. And when I ran back after my gloves this afternoon, there she was, so absorbed in my novel that she didn't even hear me laugh as I danced a jig in the hall. What a pleasant life she might have if only she chose. I don't envy her much, in spite of her money. After all, rich people have about as many worries as the poor ones do, I think," added Joe. Why doesn't Joe envy her aunt? Micah? Yeah, and they don't get to have nearly as much fun as she does, according to Joe. "Oh, that reminds me," said Meg, "that I've got something to tell, though it isn't funny like Joe's story. At the King's today, I found everybody in a flurry. One of the children said that her oldest brother had done something dreadful, and Papa had sent him away. I heard Mrs. King crying, and Mr. King talking very loud, and the girls' eyes were all red and swollen from crying. I didn't ask any questions, of course, but I felt so sorry for them, and I was rather glad I hadn't any wild brothers to do wicked things and disgrace the family." "Well, I think being disgraced in school is a great deal tryinger than anything bad boys can do." Okay, what is tryinger? Ian?
Triangle. Amy means to say more trying or more.
It's kind of like when someone says, when someone is trying to say that something is more fun, but they say it's funner. Okay, she's trying to say that it's a great deal more trying or more difficult. Okay, but instead she says more tryinger or more difficulter. Okay, "I think being disgraced in school is a great deal tryinger than anything bad boys can do," said Amy, shaking her head. "Susie Perkins came to school today with a lovely red carnelian ring. I wanted it dreadfully, and wished I was her with all my might. Then she drew a wicked picture of Mr. Davis," her teacher, "and we were laughing over it, when all of a sudden he ordered Susie to bring up her slate." So it would be like if you're drawing a funny picture of me and I say, "Bring me that." You're like, "Uh-oh." She was paralyzed with fright, but she went, and oh, what do you think he did? He took her by the ear! The ear!
Ow!
Just fancy how horrid! And led her to the recitation platform and made her stand there for half an hour, holding that slate so everyone could see. I didn't envy her then, for I felt that millions of carnelian rings wouldn't have made me happy after that. I never should have got over such an agonizing mortification. What is a mortification? Aiden?
Ophelia Shannon.
And Amy went on with her work with an air of pride in her own virtue and the use of 2 long words in one breath. I saw something I liked this morning, and I meant to tell at dinner, but I forgot, said Beth, putting Joe's topsy-turvy basket in order as she talked. When I went to get some oysters for Hannah, I saw Mr. Lawrence in the fish shop, busy with Mr. Cutter the fishman. A poor woman came in with a pail and a mop, and asked Mr. Cutter if he would let her do some scrubbing for just a bit of fish, because she hadn't had any dinner for her children. Mr. Cutter was in a hurry and said no, rather crossly. She was going away, looking hungry and sorry, when Mr. Lawrence hooked up a big fish with the crooked end of his cane and held it out to her. She was so glad and surprised, she took it right into her arms and thanked him over and over. He told her to go along and cook it, and she hurried off so happy. Wasn't it good of him? Oh, she did look so funny, too, hugging that big, slippery fish. What did Mr. Lawrence do that she thought was so nice? Manny? He gave the poor woman the fish. Okay? She was coming to ask, hey, can I just scrub your floors? She wanted to work for it. Mr. Lawrence said, no. He wasn't even the owner. He bought it for her and gave it to her. Said, here, take this. I'll pay for it. When they had laughed at Beth's story, they asked their mother for one. And after a moment's thought, she said soberly, so this is like very seriously, kind of like she's not joking around, this means a lot to her. Well, as I sat there, cutting out blue flannel jackets today, I felt very anxious about Father, or very scared for him, and thought how lonely and helpless we would be if anything happened to him. Then an old man came in with an order for some clothes. He sat down near me, and I began to talk to him, for he also looked poor and tired and anxious. Have you any sons in the army? I asked. Yes, ma'am. I had 4, but 2 were killed. One's a prisoner, and I'm going to the other, who is very sick in a Washington hospital, he answered quietly. He had 4 sons in the war. 2 were killed. One's a prisoner on the other side, and one is sick in a hospital. He has almost lost all 4 of his kids in the army. Wow, you have done a great deal for your country, sir, I said, feeling respect for him now instead of pity. Nah, not a mite more than I ought to, ma'am. I'd go fight myself if I was any use, but as I ain't, I gave my boys, and I gave them 3. Do you hear what he said? She said, you've done a great deal for your country. He's like, no, that's what I should have done. I would have gone and fought myself, but I can't. I'm too old. So I gave my boys, and I gave them for free. That's what I do for my country. I give my people. I give myself to them. So this is Marmy. That's a good question. Let's see what he says. He spoke so cheerfully and seemed so glad to give his all that I was ashamed of myself. I had given 1 man and thought that was too much, while he gave 4, without even grudging them. I still have all my girls to comfort me at home, and there his last son was waiting, miles away, to say goodbye to him, perhaps. I felt so rich, so happy thinking of my blessings, that I made him a nice bundle, gave him some money, and thanked him heartily for the lesson he had taught me. What is the moral of this lesson? What did she learn from this man's story? Jacob?
That she had to do a lot. She was sort of hard, but she was
Even though what Marmy was going through was hard, right? No one's saying, hey, it shouldn't be hard for you. Your husband's fighting in the war. No, that's still hard, but there is always someone who has it worse. Yes.
so
Make it fast.
it would be a funny sight seeing that lady putting the big sign because she's like,
Mm-hmm.
so she's like,
I think she was trying to carry it, and it was a big, big fish.
And slippery.
Oh, tell another story, Mother. One with a nice moral to it, like this one, said Joe, after a minute's silence. Mrs. March began at once, for she had told stories to this little audience for many years, and knew how to please them. Well, once upon a time, there were 4 girls who had enough to eat and drink and wear, a good many comforts and pleasures, kind friends and parents who loved them dearly, and yet they still were not contented. What does contented mean? Brooklyn? Yes, thinks they have enough. She said once upon a time there were 4 girls that had this, but it still wasn't enough. Here the listeners stole sly looks at one another and began to sew steadily. Say it properly. Okay? So it's kind of like once she says that, and still we're not contented. They kind of all stop and we're like, looking at each other like, I think she's talking about us. These girls wanted to be good and made excellent resolutions, but they didn't keep them very well. They were constantly saying, if only we had this, or if only we could do that, quite forgetting how much they already had and how many things they actually could do. So they asked an old woman what spell they could use to make them happy, and she said, when you feel discontented, or like you want more things than what you have, think over your blessings and be grateful. So they decided to try her advice, and soon were surprised to see how well off they were. One discovered that money couldn't keep shame and sorrow out of the rich people's houses. Which girl is she referring to there? Meg. Another found that, even though she was poor, she was a great deal happier with her youth, health, and good spirits than a certain fretful, feeble old lady who couldn't enjoy her comforts. Who learned that lesson?
Joe.
A third discovered that, as disagreeable as it was to help get dinner, it was harder still to have to go begging for it. Who was that? And the fourth learned that even carnelian rings were not so valuable as good behavior.
Amy.
So they all agreed to stop complaining, to enjoy the blessings they already possessed, and try to deserve them, lest they should be taken away entirely. And I believe they were never disappointed or sorry that they took the old woman's advice. Now, Marmee, that is very cunning of you to turn our own stories against us and give us a sermon like that, cried Meg. I like that kind of sermon. It's the kind Father used to tell us, said Beth thoughtfully. We needed that lesson, and we won't forget it, said Joe, taking it to heart as much as any of them.
She doesn't talk.